Hello and welcome back to Indie Book Talk. Today we have E.D. Hackett, the author of The Havoc in My Head. And E.D. is here to talk to us because I didn't know this until she reached out, but apparently October is Pituitary Tumor Awareness Month. And this book has something to do with that. So we'll talk about that and some other things along the way. Welcome to the show, E.D.
Thank
Welcome.
you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so I did read this book. It's here. Hello. If you're watching, you can see the book. If you're listening, I just made that sound because I held up the book cover, and you're missing out by not watching the video version. Anyway, uh, tell us a little bit about the book. My understanding is that you have some personal experience that led to the writing of this book. Is that correct?
Correct. So I had been struggling with my vision for a while, and my doctor couldn't find anything that was concerning. I went to my regular doctor for other issues like rapid weight gain, heart palpitations, and they, did their tests and said everything was fine. And then one day I woke up and I couldn't see. And I went to the emergency room and they ran a bunch of tests and they found a tumor growing out of my pituitary gland. So this novel that I wrote, it's a fictionalized account of my experience from the early symptoms when I would tell people what was going on, and I just felt like I was going crazy. Like no one was taking me seriously. No one could give me answers or even direct me to where I could go to get answers. And as I was going through the diagnosis, the treatment, and the recovery, I wrote that book while it was happening. I had kept a journal also every step of the way. And that whole experience not only affected me, but my entire family, my children, my husband. And I just felt like I would tell people that I had a pituitary tumor, and so many would say, "Oh, I know someone who had that," or "Oh, I know someone who had that surgery," or "Oh, yeah, so and so's brother had that and he's fine, it's fine." And I felt like they there wasn't a whole lot of understanding about it. Not just the physical piece, but the emotional piece, the emotional journey behind it. And that was why I wrote that book. Because of my treatment plan, I was out of work for a year. I couldn't drive. I couldn't go to work. And up until my first surgery, I couldn't read. And my 8-year-old daughter would just wanted me to read to her, and I couldn't see the words. They disappeared on the page. And I'd sit under a window with natural light and a flashlight because everything was blurring out. So I felt like it was a really important novel to write. I did fictionalize the people in the story, but the emotion behind the journey it's true for so many of us. And so I just wanted it to be available for survivors, but also their family and loved ones that are trying to support them through it.
Well, what I
And have
find
you
really
received a lot of?
interesting is
Go
that
ahead.
you wrote it while you were going through it. Like I know a lot of people who wrote books about life experiences, but usually it's after they've sort of felt the feelings and gone through it in some way. So I'm curious, how did you come I mean, you knew in the moment like, "Ha, this is something I have to write a book about while it's happening." How did you come to that realization? And was
So,
that harder or easier?
so I had been journaling it from day one, and I had 2 surgeries. So there was about a 6-month period where I was just processing what was going on. And after my second surgery, my vision pretty much returned to baseline, and I was out of work, and my kids at that time were in school, and I had all this time by myself. And I felt like I needed to do it for me to process what had happened because our life had changed so drastically because of that experience. I also have this fear that I'm going to die and my kids aren't going to know who I truly am. And so every time
Oh.
there's something
Mhm.
like substantial in our lives, I always start a journal addressed to them just in case. And
Oh.
so that was kind of part of the reason too. Like I wanted them, even though they're younger, to realize what our family went through. So that was kind of what led to the writing of the novel.
And have you had a lot of feedback from people suffering from similar issues?
Yeah, I'm part of a Facebook group and there's thousands of people in it from all over the world and a lot of them have read it. And I've gotten a lot of feedback like, thank you. This is such a good book for anyone who has a brain tumor, or I felt like I was reading about myself. And that's who I'm writing for too. Those people that feel like there's no one that understands what they're going through. And the tumor is very different for everyone. It's dependent on the size, um, if the vision's affected, if the hormones are affected. But that emotional piece is just, it's the central core for all of
Hmm.
us. So even though my details about my tumor might be different than the next person, they can still understand what was being portrayed through that novel.
I'm sure they can still understand the fear and everything that's going through your mind when you don't even know what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, it was it was a really hard 2 years for my family, and like thankfully for us, we were able to get it straightened out. But for so many people, because it's not overly common. If you're in a certain part of the country where there isn't a specialty center, you get misdiagnosed over and over again. Like my doctor first told me that he thought I had multiple sclerosis because of the way my optic nerve looked. And that wasn't the case. But I didn't have a neurology appointment for a month. And so for an entire month, I researched multiple sclerosis and every symptom. I was like, yes, that's me, that's me, that's me, that's me.
Hmm.
And, there's just so many opportunities for misdiagnosis if you're not seeing the right people. So,
Hmm.
So I did read the book, and in my reading, there was a line where the main character says, uh, 2019 had been so hard and she hoped the next year would be better for her family. And I immediately went, right? Because I didn't realize until that point exactly when, it was obviously modern, but I wasn't sure exactly when. And
yeah.
when she said that, I was like, oh no. And then it was just hanging over me for the rest of the book that, like, this is going to happen. And am I going to see it was the question. Is the story going to end before that? Um, so was your experience happening
Yeah.
into the pandemic? Like, was that real for you as well?
Yeah. So I went to the hospital on Halloween. My first
Mm.
surgery was the weekend of Thanksgiving. The appendicitis on Thanksgiving was true
Mm.
with my daughter.
Mm.
And we went to the hospital and they wheeled in an extra bed for me because I had just gotten out of the hospital. So we're both in there and it's sharing an emergency room because she had to go.
Yeah.
But then, yes, my second surgery was in January. And I remember being in the hospital and seeing the news, and it was just being announced in Asia. And yeah, I mean, everything with the radiation, having to go in every day with the masks, being alone, all of that happened. So I think for my kids too, that made it really difficult for them
Hmm.
because I was so sick. I was sleeping all the time. I for 2 weeks, I had what looked like tampons in both of my nostrils, and they were soaked in blood, and the
Oh.
ENT had to remove them, and like my daughter was afraid of me, and
Mm.
it was just a really hard experience for all of us. But the way that the character ended with, reflecting on the positive in her life, it was probably the best thing that could have happened for my family when all
Yeah.
was said and done. And just, we all changed our perspective on life in general, and what is really important,
Mm-hmm.
and even like my husband and I, all that stuff in there about the main character, like that was real. And it was a really hard time because of the hormonal stuff that was going on with me and the emotional stuff that I wasn't aware about. So it really was a blessing, which, is crazy because I still have the tumor in my head. They couldn't get it all, and I'm
Oh.
still being monitored for growth. So it is a little stressful still, but that transformation that main character had was 100% true to our situation.
So you've written other books as well. Do
Yes.
you use these issues in those books, or is that completely separate? Does it
Well,
affect them in any way?
I do write women's fiction, so they all transform at the end. But I do kind of keep my stories very separate from each other. I haven't really gone into any medical issues for any of my other main characters. So I do, this was like my baby. This was like pouring my heart onto the paper. So it's something that I think deserves to be alone.
Did you at any point think, maybe I shouldn't put all the details in? Like, was there anything that felt
Yeah.
too
I
personal? Because this
so
feels very personal.
so the reason, I mean, I had to change all the names, all the characters, because there were things that had happened that did not go in there, and I just didn't want to hurt people
Hmm.
by writing certain things. I did give a copy to all my doctors, and my favorite doctor, he said, "I read your book, and I think I know who I was, and it was not flattering." And I
Oh
was
Oh,
like,
no.
yeah, I was like, that's not what I meant. I didn't mean for that. Like, you're my favorite doctor, I promise. But in that moment, when he says to me, "You're going to go blind and you will die if you don't get this removed," I mean, how do you take that? That's terrifying. So,
yeah.
It's
but
not
yeah.
like you're gonna write him like, and he was handsome as he swooped in to tell me. I was going
Yeah.
like,
Well, I'm like, I changed your name. I didn't name the hospital. There's no way to connect you to it. But
Well, I think you did a beautiful job of really painting the picture of what it's like to deal with a health crisis in in the sense of how doctors respond, how the medical complex responds. Uh, I know I have a chronic illness, and so I've been through some of this in obviously a very different capacity, but it is you get those doctors who don't seem to understand that their words are landing in a very different way than it perhaps they mean them.
Mhm,
Um, or my favorite part was when she says, "I'm getting mixed signals." This one doctor says, "Oh, it's great." Another doctor says, "Well, we didn't get all of it, but that's fine." And then another doctor's like, "You're going to die. Who do I believe? What do I do?" And that's so real
right.
that
mhm.
it was satisfying to see it kind of reflected back on the page in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, the doctors, they do this every day. They see this, they do these
Mhm,
surgeries multiple times a week. It's no big deal to them. But for someone going through it, it's earth shattering in
mhm.
that moment. And it is easy to forget that when you're desensitized to it.
Yeah. So
So are you still
seeing
keeping track of things in a journal for going forward?
I haven't. I'm in a good place now. I feel like everything is stable, and it's been 2 years since my radiation, so now it's just monitoring the hormones and making sure there isn't any new growth. So I feel good about it. I did make some life changes after everything that happened. I ended up going back to work full time, but it was just too much. I was seeing a speech therapist because I was having memory issues and executive functioning problems, and that's what I do for a job. So I reached out to someone to help me practice those strategies. But I ended up leaving, and now I'm only working 3 days a week. And so I feel like that never would have happened prior to the diagnosis, because I've always been a work, 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 work type of
Mm-hmm.
person. And, I used to pride myself in having 50 balls in the air and not dropping them. But going through that experience with my family and seeing how it affected them, I realized the importance of balance and the
Mm-hmm.
importance of being there for your children for their emotional needs, not just their physical. Um,
And yourself. I
and
mean,
yourself,
you
yes.
need your own time.
Yeah. And, it's still been good for my family. I feel like we talk about it all the time. We talk about Timmy, the tumor, which is what we named him, which was for the kids, and it made it real. Um, but it's definitely been a really good transition since the initial trauma has ended.
Do you have any thoughts or advice for other authors who might want to write a story from their real life? Is there anything you learned along the way that you could share with them?
So I know some people choose to write memoirs, which are very factual, but if you're afraid of being that vulnerable, then I would recommend going the fictional route. Like, I like to tell people it's a pseudo memoir. It's true to an extent, but again,
Mm-hmm.
everything has been concocted. And I think that's a good way to get the emotional journey out there, if you're questioning the subject material and if certain people will read it.
Hmm.
Great. And now you're going to be working on other fiction novels?
Yeah, I have a total of 4 out, and I've been focusing actually on Kindle Vella, which is keeping me accountable with my writing. And I have a book out at the editor right now. So I'm hoping around maybe January it'll be ready for the world.
Awesome.
Is this
Is
more for the Block Island series, or are these separate?
No,
she's
this
reading about
this
you.
is this is separate. It's actually a sweet romance. I thought I would kind of try that genre, which
Mhm.
is why I tried it on Kindle Vella to get some initial feedback, because I don't typically write that genre. Um, but it's a sweet romance that I'm writing. The Block Island series, the first book was my very first ever that I wrote.
Mm-hmm.
And it was right before my surgeries, before my
Mm-hmm.
diagnosis, and my husband called writing my hobby. So I wrote this book. I didn't know what a 3-act structure was. I didn't know what various points of view were, but I did it, and I was proud of it, and I you know, did everything myself. And I'm sure people that read it are like, but I need it out there to know where I started from and where I've grown as an author. So it will remain out there, even though I feel like every novel I publish improves in terms of craft, pacing, understanding what makes a novel a novel. But yes, that one was my first book. So
It just intrigued me because I was just at Block Island. So I was like,
oh,
oh, he's there.
really?
We
Yeah.
went and did the glass orb hunting.
Oh, okay. Did you find any?
No.
No. Yeah, that's really big out there.
It was like, so for Emma and those that don't know, at one point there was this glass artist in Block Island. I don't remember the whole story, but essentially they make these glass orbs and they started hiding them all over the island and people could go find them. So it's hundreds a year that they hide all over this island on all these trails and parks. And if you find it, you get a numbered glass orb.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
And it's all registered and you can go online and there's groups for it. And it's just a cute little thing to go do. And they just did it to help support their glass blowing and when times were low.
Yeah, that's a really fun
cool.
idea.
Also, I would like to point out that I was not the one that led us off on the tangent.
No, it's always
Shelley
me.
this time.
That's my job.
No.
I've got one job.
So as we come to the end of our time together, if people want to keep track of your rapidly improving novels over time, where can they find you on the internet?
So I actually am on Facebook and I'm also on Instagram. I've tried TikTok, but it's just not my thing. But on Instagram, I'm at Edie Hackett Writes.
Mhm.
All right.
And on Facebook, it's Edie Hackett. E.D. Hackett, because there actually is an Ed Hackett who's a freelance writer, which I didn't realize. So
You should co-write something.
we
ED and
should,
N.
yes.
That won't be confusing at all. Do you have a website?
I do. It's edhackettrates.com.
Okay, edhacketwrites.com. So,
Yeah.
Great.
anyone out there, if you want to learn more about what it's like to have a pituitary tumor, or if someone in your life has one and you're curious and or want to help them, I do recommend the book. I read it. I did that thing where I was like, I'm only going to read like the first couple of chapters so I have some context. And then I read the whole thing very quickly because I needed to find out what happened to the main character and what was going on with her. And I knew she had a tumor, obviously, because we had this podcast set up, but I kept being like, yeah, but what? But is she going to be okay? But what's going to happen to her family? So yeah, here's the book, The Havoc in My Head. Go check it out. Thank you so much for being on the show, Edie. We
Yes,
really
thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you. It was really nice meeting you guys.
You too.